The Denver Broncos must unleash Courtland Sutton and Jeudy this week against the Houston Texans. Plus, the offense and the team in general must be unforgiving against the Houston Texans. And the offensive line is set with the return of potential one other player. But will he start on Sunday? You get that and much more in today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos country? Welcome into a brand new episode, Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much to everybody in Broncos country for tuning in and making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day, free and available everywhere you get your podcasts in audio format, or whether you're watching us on YouTube. We appreciate you so much. Do us a favor, hit that subscribe or that follow button down below so you never miss out on a day's worth of Denver Broncos news, content, coverage, and more every single day all year long. From the South Stands to the end zone, I'm your host as always, Cody Roark, Broncos beat reporter for Mile High Sports, joined alongside by my co-host, Sayre Bedinger, site expert, predominantly orange.com. The Broncos, they're just going about 48 hours away from kickoff, and you know what? What a better way to kind of get the nasty taste out of starting off 1-0 than by going through and taking care of business in your home opener. There's a lot of things the Broncos will have to do in order to make that happen, but you know what? The opportunity to kind of right the ship a little bit presents itself for this Denver Broncos team.
Oh, it definitely does. You get a home opener against the Houston Texans. And Cody, I think for most of the offseason, it's been pretty clear that the Texans are one of those teams in the NFL that's still in the process of rebuilding. They have some nice pieces, but it's certainly going to be one of those games where you expect a team like the Denver Broncos, led by Russell Wilson, a very good defense as well. You're going to expect a team like the Broncos to take care of business at home in a matchup like this. Of course, no NFL team is to be underestimated. We found that out in week 1 as the Broncos dropped to the Seattle Seahawks, who on paper, the Broncos are just a better team. That's just the way it is. For any Seahawks fans still listening, welcome back.
We appreciate you for listening.
We appreciate you. Yes, thank you for doing that. But I think, Cody, obviously you want to get right against the Houston Texans, and this is an opportunity for the Broncos to do exactly that.
And one way that they can do that, Sayre, we talk about Russell Wilson, the Broncos offense, so much production, but missed opportunities, not being able to finish, right? And that was the big thing that we talked about on the Locked On Broncos, Locked On Texans crossover episode with Cody Davis. The Broncos must finish against the Houston Texans. But you know what they need to do in order to maybe put themselves in a department to do that? They need to unleash Courtland Sutton and Jeudy against a young Houston Texans secondary led by very, very talented cornerback Derek Stingley Jr. I mean, I'm eager to see which receiver he decides to line up on, but part of me is also wondering, how will the Texans play the Broncos in coverage against the Indianapolis Colts? They played a lot of man-to-man because you really just had Michael Pittman, who is really the biggest threat for the Texans defense last week. Indy didn't have as many guys, any solidified guys at the wide receiver position that Denver has. So I imagine we'll probably see some zone. I mean, we know Lovie Smith loves to rub that Tampa 2 defense, so we're going to see Derek Stingley playing press coverage underneath with the safety over the top. To me, that's a huge question, but one thing is for certain, let Courtland Sutton and Jeudy go off in this game. I mean, both of them, they almost had a 100-yard receiving game. Each of them, Jerry had over 100 yards. Courtland had 75 yards. So can this be a game where we see maybe what happened, what we used to see with Demaryius Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders?
Oh, man, I really hope it could be, and I think it could be because, I mean, against the Seattle Seahawks, remember, there was a lot of talk in the first half about why is Courtland Sutton not getting involved? Why is Jeudy not got a target yet? Remember, I'm old enough to remember that, Cody, so it's crazy. Like you said, they were still both able to almost have 100 yards. Obviously, Jeudy did get over 100 yards, thanks large in part to that big 67-yard touchdown that he had. But this is a real opportunity for the Broncos going up against a young secondary with, like you said, Derek Stingley Jr. is the top cornerback there. And then Jalen Petre is their stud safety, the second-round pick out of Baylor. So they obviously have high hopes for these guys. But those are the two main pieces in the secondary. I have a soft spot, Cody, for Desmond King, my Iowa guy. He plays the nickel. And we know he's been pretty good at that over the years. But at the same time, I think you look at this matchup on paper, you see a rookie corner out there. Of course, we saw Patrick Surtain last year. He wasn't necessarily a mismatch as a rookie corner, so Derek Stingley could be just as good. You know, he's a very good player in his own right. But to me, Cody, I see this as a huge opportunity for the Broncos to attack a young secondary. Russell Wilson, a veteran quarterback, he should be able to get those guys in the right positions to be able to kind of pick this defense apart. Again, no disrespect. It's just a veteran quarterback with very good receivers, established receivers against a young secondary. And we kind of tend to see in the NFL how that often works out.
Yeah, and I think for Russell Wilson, I mean, this is his first game in front of a Denver audience, so it's going to be loud at Empire Field at Mile High. There's going to be 76,000 fans wearing orange jerseys in the stadium. It's going to be a little bit of a different reception for Russell Wilson as it was in comparison to Week 1 in Seattle, so I think they have to take advantage of that. But, one thing that I thought Courtland Sutton did really well against Seattle that I feel like he can maybe continue to take advantage of, he and Jerry both, was against zone coverage, they were finding the soft spots to sit. Like, that's one thing we saw with Courtland. But I also think this is a week where you can test downfield with these guys a little bit more with Courtland Sutton. I mean, heck, on Thursday Night Football, we saw Justin Herbert testing downfield to his sizable target, Mike Williams. The Broncos have to get back to this with Courtland Sutton, and I'm eager to see how things open up for them this week. But one thing is for certain, you must unleash Courtland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy against the Houston Texans. It's a good test for them, especially with a very talented young cornerback in Derek Stingley Jr., but also these guys have yet to face a wide receiving core like the Denver Broncos. Granted, it's only week 2, but for the Broncos, I expect them to try to take advantage of this, and I think that they should attack it early and often on Sunday. That is one of our keys to the game. But coming up here in just a moment, Sayre and I are going to dive a little bit deeper into why the Broncos need to have an unforgiving mentality on Sunday against the Houston Texans. You get that and more coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, let me tell you about Turo, the sponsor of today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Turo is the world's largest car-sharing marketplace, and with Turo, you can book any car you want, whether you want it from a community of local hosts. Browse a huge selection of vehicles for just about any occasion or budget across the U.S., Canada, and the UK, and you can book a spacious SUV or minivan for a family road trip. You can get a classic or luxury car for a special event, birthday, or holiday. And you can find affordable economy cars if you're on a budget and just need to get from A to B. You can test drive that new electric vehicle that you've had your eye on to see how it fits in your everyday life. And many Turo hosts can even deliver the car right to you. Every trip is backed by liability insurance. Terms, conditions, and exclusions apply. Ditch boring rental cars and find your drive at Turo.com. As we jump into the second half action on today's episode of Locked On Broncos, the Broncos must embody what it means to be unforgiving as a football team here in Week 2, coming off of a loss in their Week 1 season opener against the Seattle Seahawks. Thank you so much, Broncos Country, for tuning in and making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day, every single day, free and available everywhere you get your podcasts or whether you watch on YouTube. We appreciate you so much for tuning in because Locked On Broncos, your team every day, truly means that. We are here for you every single day, all year long. All the Broncos news, content, coverage, and more you get in one place. Sayre, looking at this Broncos team, all week long, social media, I feel like, has been very unbearable at times. Some of the conspiracy theory type posts. We've even gotten in our YouTube comment section about how the Broncos were paid to lose the game against the Seahawks and just all this stuff like the fire and Hackett, fire the whole coaching staff, trade Russ. Like, we've seen some of the craziest things in our mentions after Week 1 to a loss to the Seattle Seahawks. People have got to move on from that. Week 2 is here. The Houston Texans are coming to town. And you know what I would really like to see? I would like to see them take that and compile all those emotions into one thing, and that is be unforgiving against the Houston Texans on offense and on defense.
I would love it, Cody. This is my favorite style of football. It's my favorite game to watch every year. Well, I guess it was only really happening once a year over the last 6 years. But remember back in the Peyton Manning glory days when you could just start watching a game and then after the first quarter, like, your heart's not beating fast, you're able to actually eat food and you're not doing it nervously. So you're just watching the game and just enjoying, like, man, I wonder who's going to get the next touchdown, or I wonder who's going to be padding their stats after this commercial break, who's going to get the next strip sack. Those are the best games, Cody. So I am all for opening this up and really putting the pedal to the metal, right? That's exactly what you want to see the Broncos do. You want to see them come out, whatever analogy you want to use, whether it's, step on the gas, step on the throat, show no mercy, all of those different things. That's what you want to see them do as a team in this game. And we saw, the Houston Texans, they were a bit susceptible. I know they played 5 quarters, so you got to give them a little bit of grace there. But, man, they were a little bit susceptible defensively in Week 1 against Matt Ryan and the Colts. I can only think that against a team that's led by Russell Wilson, like you said, playing at home in front of 70,000 plus orange fans dressed in orange, it's going to be crazy for the Houston Texans. and the Broncos are going to have a big opportunity to put up some big numbers.
Well, and for the offense, I know we talked about Courtland Sutton, Jeudy, those guys going off. When I look at Houston, we actually had this preview as well with Cody Davis of the Locked On Texans podcast. I mean, the way that this Houston Texans defense plays so far early on here in the season, I mean, they were playing against Jonathan Taylor. I mean, Jonathan Taylor still had 160 yards rushing, but it was on 31 total attempts. I don't know if you want to necessarily get in that kind of game here for the Broncos, but they play aggressive downhill football. Like, they're just constantly attacking. Their defensive ends are split out wide. They play usually some over fronts, which means that there's a 3 technique to the strength side, and then they just have 3 linebackers that boom, 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 plug and fill their gaps at an aggressive level, and they'll also send some help from the nickel. We talked about Desmond King a little bit earlier. They'll send him on some inside pressures as well. So I still feel like this will be a game where they really try to go all out against the run, but this is where the Broncos just have to kind of embrace that again. I thought they did a really good job against the Seattle Seahawks, but they found themselves in situations where they had to pass it a little bit more because you're trailing in the fourth quarter. You can't afford to run too much time off the clock if you miss another opportunity, especially with the way things were going for Denver. But here's something that Houston did. In week 1 against the Colts, they allowed over 517 total yards of offense to the Colts there. That's a lot. I mean, the Broncos, I think, allowed barely under like 230 total yards, which is unbelievable, especially considering the great second half they had. But Houston allowed 177 yards rushing to the Colts there. And granted, the Colts, going back to last season, one of the best rushing teams in the NFL. Jonathan Taylor had a real legitimate case of MVP, Offensive Player of the Year, so on and so forth. But here's where I think the Broncos can come through. Houston allowed 340 passing yards in week 1. How many yards did the Seahawks allow Russell Wilson to throw for as well? 340, which put him as the 3rd leading passer in the National Football League, considering 70% completion percentage as well. This is where the Broncos just need to continue to build on some of those things. And when you look back at that game, and I even asked Russell Wilson this week, I asked him what they can build on going into this week. He says, we have to, understand, like, we have to finish things. We can't have turnovers. We had so many opportunities, and we just missed out on them. We fumbled the ball, and he said, we had a couple of penalties that called some stuff back. He said, we just got to eliminate those mistakes, stay on schedule, which if you noticed the mic'd up, that was one thing he was saying all game long. Hey, let's stay on schedule, boys. Let's stay on schedule. I think this is a good moment for the Broncos to really come in and unleash and impose their will on the Texans. Even though, like I said, I'm not overlooking the Texans. The Texans are going to be a tough test. They're going to be very aggressive. But the Broncos can't worry about that. They got to worry about themselves, and they need to take it out on the Texans.
They do, and just like we've talked about, and I've refrained from saying any of this on Twitter, Cody, because I know a lot of the fans that are jumping into my mentions from Seattle's side of things are saying, well, they dominated, like they were the better team, this, that, and the other. But it's important to remember going into this game, the Broncos punted 1 time against Seattle. They got into scoring range on literally every other possession that they had in the game. They were able to move the ball absolutely at will against Seattle. It was a couple of those big plays, like you mentioned, those 2 fumbles there in the red zone, and then the inches with, Eric Tomlinson's foot and Eric Saubert nearly making that catch. It was truly that close to being 30-plus points scored by this Broncos team in the first game of the season, which, I mean, Cody, can you really say, like, if you had preseason reps, you're not going to fumble in regular season games? I don't think you can actually say that. You just had an offense that's, first of all, they're going out there for the first time basically this season in a real game situation. And they were basically moving the ball at will.
Yeah.
It was really good play calling from Nathaniel Hackett. Then obviously you get down into that gold zone and you get down to the 1-yard line, and bad things happened a couple of times there. So unfortunately for all the detractors, it's like, well, I don't know what you're really basing your arguments on. And I think that can give the Broncos a lot of confidence going forward. And a lot of fans that are listening to this, again, if you're listening for the first time, welcome. And if you're not listening for the first time, I think it's important to have that perspective going in. The Broncos were able to move the ball at will against the Seattle Seahawks. We'll see if they can do that again against Houston. But not only that, this time cashing in on those opportunities and not relenting. Like you said, it's really about being unforgiving. You have to go out there and you kind of have to do like what college teams have to do. You got to put together one of those dominating wins that looks really, really impressive on paper if you can, because I just think the team needs that kind of confidence boost right now.
I think that's a great point as well. And there's also fans, we've been getting comments, how come the Broncos, running shotgun on the 1-yard line? Almost Every other NFL team does the same thing, but they also change it up too. Other teams do change it up, and yes, and maybe we'll see Russell Wilson under center if the Broncos find themselves on the 1-yard line this week against the Houston Texans. That's one thing to keep an eye on. But Broncos country coming up here in just a moment. The Broncos offensive line must weather another storm when it comes to the injury front of things. We get some clarity on who will start at right tackle this week. We dive into that and much more coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, let me tell you about BetOnline.net, the sponsor of today's episode, Lockdown Broncos. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your pro and college football betting needs and sports info this season. You can find all the latest football league developments, game matchups, news, and podcasts, including this year's opening week games. BetOnline is also your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. The fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events, including MLB, MMA, boxing, and golf. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Who will start for the Denver Broncos this week at right tackle as Billy Turner returned to practice early this week as a full participant? Thank you so much, Broncos country, for tuning in and making Lockdown Broncos your first listen every single day. Lockdown Broncos, part of the Lockdown Podcast Network, your team every day, and we truly mean that here. Sayre, the offensive line continues to be a little bit interesting here for this Broncos team. Now, we know the injury to Quinn Miners, the hamstring. He has not participated all week in practice, but luckily he has not been placed on IR, which is a promising sign. Just going back and watching the film, he was good when he was on the field against the Seattle Seahawks. He did really well, and Cam Fleming actually did a better job than I think most people initially thought, including myself, when I was watching it in the press box, going back and watching all 22. I thought there were some moments where he gave up pressure, but I thought he did a really good job adjusting for the most part. Now, what do the Broncos do at right tackle? Because you and I talked about it 2 days ago on Lockdown Broncos. Billy Turner was a full participant in practice. He's been full all week long for Denver. So I asked Broncos head coach Nathaniel Hackett on Thursday who would start this week at right tackle since Billy was back at practice returning as a full team participant. Would it be he or Cam Fleming? And he told me it was going to be Cam Fleming this week, but they want to continue to just see where Billy is at this point and just ease him back, which for a guy, I think you want to get him some more team reps. Really, that's how I'm reading it. Get him more team reps in practice, and then maybe next week against San Francisco Sunday Night Football, maybe that's when we see Billy Turner.
I think it very well could be, and he didn't rule out the option of potentially having Billy Turner suited up and ready to go if anything happens. But at the same time, I think, like you said, you watch the game back, you see that Cam Fleming did a pretty good job. Maybe you got something cooking there. So we'll see how Cam Fleming can do with another opportunity. And he also referred to that. He also referred to the fact that it's an opportunity for a guy like Fleming to go out there and really show what he can do. You know, he can continue to put some good things together. If he can string together some good games, maybe then Billy Turner slides in at right guard. If Quinn Miners needs some more time, we'll kind of see. But there again, Graham Glasgow has an opportunity as well if Quinn Miners has an extended absence. So we'll kind of see what happens there. But I think at least for sure in the running game, I mean, Cam Fleming did a pretty exceptional job. You watch him get out in front of some of these blocks. He was moving well. And to be honest, Cody, it looked like he was a great fit for the scheme. So, and that was something that I noticed as well, just on the offensive line as a whole, when the running game, when the calls were coming in on time and when it wasn't rushed and we weren't audibling at the line of scrimmage, when it was designed running plays, the zone scheme, I mean, these guys looked really good operating it. They were all in position. Remember under Pat Shurmur, it kind of felt like our running backs were just running into a wall immediately upon the snap of the ball. Well, that does not appear to be the case with this offense. And so far, I mean, it was one game, of course, but I'd like to think that the Seattle Seahawks have some pretty good defensive linemen led by Shelby Harris, Poona Ford, guys like that. So they have a pretty good D-line. I think the Broncos, they should feel good about what their offensive line was able to do 1 week into the season.
Well, I just remember last year, especially in the first couple of weeks, it just, like you mentioned, the Broncos, even under Pat Shurmur, they got off to a 3-0 start. But it just didn't seem like the run game was there, and it really wasn't. Like the run game got going a little bit later on, kind of like maybe like that week 4, week 5 game, and it really was sparked by Javonte Williams carrying Marlon Humphrey for about 20 yards. That's what really got the Broncos run game going, and then minus the Melvin Gordon bounce-off tackle against the New York Giants for 70-plus yards for a touchdown late in that game, week 1 last year. But, you know, for Graham Glasgow, I think this is a great opportunity for him, and, you know, I was kind of thinking about it, and I was talking with some other media members in Denver, and the thing that stood out to me, I feel like everyone's forgotten that Graham Glasgow has been a starter. Like, he's been a starter at right guard a majority of his career. So it's not like he's doing something brand new. So I feel like this week, him getting all the reps, I think it'll play a little bit of a benefit for him. There's also Netani Muti, who continues to work his way along as well. He's on the practice squad. He's been out there at practice, which is always a great sign. He did have that knee surgery shortly during training camp, kind of right before roster cuts had happened, which was what originally led to him being released. But outside of that, I think that you got to build on the run, right? I mean, the Broncos between Melvin and Javonte, I think they came close, or they hit 100 yards total combined. It was close. It was one of those two things. It was there. But Denver, as we mentioned, when they were down, they couldn't afford to run the ball as much as they wanted to, which would led to more output in the passing game for Russell Wilson. So we'll see if the run game can stay efficient. But is there anybody this week on the Houston Texans defensive line that you are concerned about here for the Broncos O-line?
Well, Jonathan Granard, Cody, is one of those guys that I think Broncos fans, you got to be aware of, because it's not going to be some random player coming off the edge for the Houston Texans. Jonathan Granard had 8 sacks last year for Houston, and he's kind of one of those budding stars for them. Certainly a player that they can build around. And really, at the beginning of last season, this Houston Texans team looked like they really didn't have many, if any, building blocks. And Jonathan Granard really became one of them. So he's one of their best players. And I think he's one to watch for. As we talk about Cam Fleming, he's going to probably get a lot of reps against Cam Fleming in this game. So Fleming's going to have his handful at that right tackle spot going up against Jonathan Granard, and then obviously Glasgow and Lloyd Cushenberry as well if he'd stunt inside. So it's going to be a fun matchup. I think a great test for Cam Fleming. Obviously, it's not a Bosa brother. It's not Myles Garrett. It's nothing like that. But it is a budding young player who is very good. So Jonathan Granard is one of those players, Cody, as we talk about the success in the running game. I think in pass protection, you're going to have your hands full with a guy like Jonathan Granard, who could win with speed, power, effort. He can do it all.
Well, this is going to be a defense that the Broncos face that is aggressive in nature. As we mentioned, Grugier Hill, one of their linebackers, had 18 total tackles against the Indianapolis Colts. Jay Owens had 15 tackles. Jalen Petrie, as you mentioned, the rookie safety, had 10 tackles against the Colts. And then you had Christian Kirksey, who had 9. Derek Stingley, the rookie corner, who had 7 tackles. Desmond King in the nickel, who had 6. And Steven Nelson, another cornerback, who had 5 total tackles. Then there's Jerry Hughes, who you have to account for as well, had 2 sacks and 2 quarterback hits, 1 tackle for a loss, not to mention also an interception from the defensive line standpoint for the Houston Texans defense. So they have some disruptors there that can absolutely impact what the Broncos want to do. Denver needs to build on it, and as we mentioned, they need to be unforgiving this week against the Houston Texans. 2:25 p.m. Mountain Time kickoff after the game. Sayre, Bedinger, and myself, we have you covered with a Locked On Broncos post-game report. We'll break down the biggest storyline, hopefully, of a Denver Broncos victory. That way Broncos country can go into Monday playing with a Victory Monday theme. We have you covered here, Locked On Broncos. Sayre, Bedinger, myself, we'll see you next time for a brand new episode of the show.